If you are already successful, but growth feels harder than it should, then this video is for you. Most people are looking at growth the wrong way. They're looking at things on the surface. They're increasing more marketing, they're adding more hires, they're putting more pressure in the system. But the thing that they're missing out is the PPOD. They look at PPOD as a number that they're tracking as a metric once per month. And they're not looking at it as an economic engine of the business. When you stop looking at PPOD as just a metric, it stops working against your system and becomes something that you design by default. And then when PPOD becomes predictable, here's what happens. Staffing becomes easier. People's morale rises. Case acceptance improves. Margins increase. Your valuation becomes predictable. It's not because people started working harder, it's because the system stopped working against them. Most DSOs are quietly shifting from looking at PPOD as just a productivity metric. They look at it as the health indicator of the business. And this is what PPOD quietly tells you about your business. Whether your chair time is being used correctly, whether your cases are sequenced intentionally, whether your providers are confident in presenting the cases, whether your incentives and trainings are aligned properly. So if your PPOD is rising sustainably, it's never about the effort. It's about the friction being removed. The opposite is also true. If your PPOD is not rising sustainably, if it's rising one month and dropping the other one, that's not performance, that's volatility. It's your system telling you there's operational misalignment underneath, even if the numbers look good. When you start looking at PPOD this way, you stop chasing growth and start engineering it. When your PPOD stabilizes and stops being volatile, it does not show up on the spreadsheets. It shows up in people's behavior. When that loop starts working, it doesn't show up in the revenue, it shows up in the people. You don't suddenly get smarter people, you get better supported talent. Roles become clear, expectations become clear, decisions stop feeling heavy. And that clarity shows up in case acceptance, not because you're pushing people harder, but because clarity replaces hesitation and confidence replaces pressure. And when cases are accepted with confidence, they move faster. You start seeing more case starts, not because of volume, but because of reduced time to chair and fewer drop-offs. That momentum improves patient experience. There's less waiting, there's more decisiveness, there are fewer handoffs, there's less friction at every stage. Here's the part that most intergroups miss. When the system becomes better aligned, it increases provider confidence. Momentum creates confidence. Confidence leads to better diagnosis, and better diagnosis feeds the loop again. That is when the day starts to feel different. It's not heroic or chaotic anymore. It's more predictable. And predictability is the real breakthrough. Because this loop does not run once, it reinforces itself. When one part improves, the others follow. PPOD does not rise in a single line. It compounds as the friction is removed. So if PPOD is the engine, this outer loop is the control panel. It does not create demand, it just decides how smoothly or violently the engine will run. Same engine, same potential can lead to drastically different outcomes depending on how the controls are set. Let's start with hiring, because this is what decides whether your PPOD is rising or leaking before day one. This system decides who enters your engine and whether they fit the cadence of your production model. Let's start with an example. Let's compare two practices that both hire an associate. In practice A, the hire decision is based on availability, speed, and willingness to stay busy. The goal is coverage. In practice B, the hire decision is based on something very different. Comfort with higher value procedures, diagnostic confidence, ability to follow sequencing protocols, and willingness to work inside a standardized flow. Fast forward 6 months. Same hours, same chairs, same support. But one doctor consistently drives higher value cases into prime hours, while the other fills the day with low value work. PPOD separates not because of effort, but because of fit. Here's the KPI to watch: revenue per provider per hire. This KPI tells you whether a hire is converting time into value or just activity. Let's talk about protocols, because this is what tells you whether high value work lands in high value times. Here is what happens without protocols. Implants, crowns, aligners land whenever the schedule allows. Prime hours get consumed by low-value procedures. High-value cases get delayed, fragmented, or pushed out. Here's what happens with protocols. The picture completely changes. Prime hours are protected. Case types are routed intentionally. Same day and near-term treatment becomes the default, not the exception. Same demand, same providers, but very different PPOD. Here's the KPI to watch. Prime hour utilization rate. The percentage of prime clinical hours used for high-value procedures. This KPI predicts PPOD's stability almost perfectly. Now, next system is trainings. This is where predictability either shows up or disappears. This system decides how consistently clinical decisions are made across providers. Here is what it looks like inside a practice. In one location, hygiene-driven exams follow a structured diagnostic checklist. Photos, scans, and language are standardized. The same conditions lead to the same recommendations. In another location, diagnosis depends entirely on individual judgment. No shared framework, same patient, different plan, different outcome. The second location does not just lose acceptance, it loses predictability. And predictability is what PPOD feeds on. Here's the KPI to watch. Diagnosis to treatment conversion rate. That is the percentage of diagnosed treatment that actually gets scheduled. This KPI tells you whether your training produces repeatable clinical decisions. Now, here's something that a lot of dental groups underestimate: incentives. This system controls one thing: what behavior gets repeated. If incentives reward gross production only, volume goes up and chaos follows. If incentives reward hours worked, burnout increases. If incentives reward new patients, hygiene overload shows up fast. But when incentives reward the right outcomes, that is, case starts, same-day treatment, predictable schedules, throughput consistency, behavior aligns naturally. There's no micromanagement required. Here's the KPI to watch: case starts per provider per month. This shows whether incentives are driving completed revenue, not just activity. And finally, retention. This decides whether your performance compounds or resets every year. In unstable systems, the pattern is predictable. High performers burn out, low performers stay invisible, turnover wipes out PPOD gains. In stable systems, something very different happens. Providers know what a good day looks like. Schedules are predictable. Expectations are clear. Growth paths exist. At that point, retention stops being an HR issue and becomes a financial strategy. Here's the KPI to watch. PPOD variance, month to month. This measures engine stability and not just peak performance. Low variance means a scalable platform. High variance means a fragile business. Now, when you look at it this way, you realize one thing. The outer layer is not creating PPOD, it's only protecting the engine that is creating PPOD. And when everything is aligned, the PPOD does not just rise, it compounds, because the engine is not fighting itself anymore. It's something that a lot of DSOs do not see unless someone points it out to them. Every system in the outer ring is designed to control one form of variability. Not effort, not motivation, variability. Here's what I mean. Hiring controls talent mismatch. When the wrong profile enters the business, even a well-intentioned one, output becomes unpredictable. Same hours, same chairs can lead to different results. Similarly, protocols control scheduling randomness. Without them, the day is run by call order instead of production logic, and randomness always shows up in the numbers. Training controls diagnostic inconsistency. If two providers see the same patient and reach different conclusions, PPOD does not just wobble, it fragments. Incentives control behavioral drift. People don't act on strategy, they act on what gets rewarded. When incentives are misaligned, variability becomes built into the system. And retention controls performance resets. Every time a provider leaves, your business forgets what normal performance looks like. Momentum does not compound, it restarts. When you really understand the system, the KPIs stop feeling like numbers and start feeling like answers. Each one tells you something very specific about whether your platform is really stable or just busy. Take hiring, for example. Revenue per provider hour tells you something very specific that a lot of dental groups do not ask out loud. Are we hiring people who are good at converting time into value, or just people who are good at looking busy? That one metric quarterly exposes whether a hire rises PPOD or just fills a schedule. Protocols show up in one place very clearly: prime hour utilization. They answer one question very brutally: are the prime hours being engineered or are they quietly wasted? because prime hours are very expensive. And if low value dentistry lives in prime hours, then that means that your PPOD never stands a chance. Now look at training. Diagnosis to treatment rate tells you nothing about your sales skills. It tells you how repeatable are your clinical decisions. If two doctors are looking at the same patient and recommending different things, then you do not have a training system. You have individual judgment. And individual judgment does not scale. And retention is what brings all of this together. PPOD variance answers one question every private equity firm really cares about. Can this business run without disruption, or does performance reset every time somebody leaves? Because when all of these 5 elements stabilize, your PPOD stabilizes. When your PPOD stabilizes, your EBITDA becomes predictable. And when your EBITDA becomes predictable, your multiple rises almost automatically. This is a real shift. You don't grow by pushing harder. You grow by removing variability. This is not growth by chance. This is growth by design.